Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes Myofascial Release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I'm joined here by a very special guest. She's been a MFR therapist for just over 10 years. She's a certified massage therapist, and she started her own myofascial release practice in 2015. It's my honor to introduce Lindsay Courcelle. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Now, I've seen you around online and we've just recently connected, but I would love to know, how did you even get into myofascial release?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that story because I definitely feel like I was called to it by John. It was actually not that long after I got married in 2013 that I still had this persistent pattern of kind of wanting to flee. And I was consciously in the best place I could imagine. I was really happy with my husband. We were building this life in Vermont, where he's from. And I had just gotten married. I just felt like I should feel really good. And I had this internal, what I can only now describe as just a total discomfort with stability in my life. And I think it comes from childhood patterning. And I just was like, what is wrong with me is basically what I was feeling. And I remember just walking down to the mailbox and getting one of John's brochures. And it was one of the ones where he has his arms across his chest and his big turquoise ring out. And for whatever reason, I saw the brochure and I was just like, I think I'm meant to see, to have this type of therapy. And so it was really more kind of emotional turmoil, I would say, that drew me to myofascial release. I'd already been a massage therapist and, I'd emoted a ton in massage school and I generally don't have a problem expressing my emotions, but it was just this persistent pattern. And so I actually booked a trip to Austin where my brother lives. And I went and saw Tanya Green, who I'm not sure if she's in practice anymore, but within that I went there because in Vermont, there was no one very nearby and especially no female therapist nearby. And so I went to her and within 5 minutes of her putting her hands on my body, I was just sobbing and just felt such a huge release of just really old stuff, really peeling back the layers of the onion. And it felt like it was absolutely where I should be. And from that point on, I just dove right in. I think I took my first seminar just a few months later and then proceeded to take a whole lot of seminars over the next couple years. And I did a T for T that following year. And it was really in the T for T, my life had gotten really chaotic, especially my relationship with my husband. We were struggling, but it was all because this pattern was just up for me to change and shift and for me to figure out how to be comfortable with stability. And I think a lot of that, like I said, came from my childhood. My mom and stepdad had a really tumultuous relationship and we would move away and then move back every year for 5 years. So it was a lot of that from the ages of maybe 5 to 10 when, children are really developing their sense of safety and security. And so I just got more comfortable with instability, I think. And so now as an adult, as I had this stable life, stable man, really good, so much goodness, I just couldn't quite feel safe and comfortable in it. And so after my T for T, about a month after that, things finally just totally dissolved with that pattern. And I've never felt it since. I've never felt that desire to just up and leave. And so it's been really good. And I've been married to my husband now for 12 years or something like that. So it's been a really good thing for my life in so many ways, but especially just that being able to feel joy, I would say more than anything, and safety and security in my own well-being.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would
Yeah.
like to dive in a little deeper. So, I believe that any relationship, there's three different phases. The first phase is kind of like the honeymoon phase, like the puppy love, and nothing goes wrong. You only see the good parts. And then if you get into a relationship deep enough, then these unresolved childhood wounds will reveal themselves. And if you are lucky enough, you'll work through those. I do feel like that's where a lot of relationships and marriages end. And kudos to you for doing that inner work to overcome some of these things. And then eventually, what you hope is you get to this kind of eternal love, which is the kind of the peace that I'm hearing that you have now. Can you talk us through how you went about engaging with this feeling of needing to flee and overcoming that?
Yeah, I mean, I can try it. Yeah, I agree with you that there can be these different phases. And when my husband and I got married, we'd already been together, I think, about 7 years because we're coming up on 19 years. We met when we were 23. I'm 41 now. So we had actually we'd been through a bit by the time we got married. And so he, I think, knew that I had some of this pattern within me. And my husband is just amazing and was able to see the goodness in me and know, I was able to speak to, I think I could just feel that the pattern was so deep within me. And like I said, it was at some point it became conscious for me, right? Like consciously, I was wanting to be in my life the way it was, but something so deep down beyond the conscious level in my subconscious was what was holding me back. And I don't know, that year of, it's like what John talks about with chaos. Sometimes things get really chaotic before they reorganize, and you see that with someone in a healing crisis. And that was how it was in my relationship as well. Like we were just kind of fumbling for that first year of marriage, I would say, like where I was just doing all of these seminars and kind of having all of these epiphanies about my childhood trauma. And my husband is just a super grounded, earthy sort of person. And I'm an airy, like I'm a Libra. I just kind of like float around more. And so he was just kind of keeping me grounded. And I think in our relationship, we've had this amazing ability to kind of, I do think of myself as almost like a balloon, and he's what is like tethering me to the ground. And we have this push and pull where like he'll let a little more slack into the string of the balloon, and then he'll like rein me back in enough, and it's, I don't know, it's a good balance for us. But I mean, I won't lie, it was messy. And it really got to this point of like, we thought we were probably going to break up. And then, really, somehow within like a couple of days after that point, it just basically, when he kind of just let go of the outcome for himself and for us, then everything, it was like I could find peace in my own body and just say, like, okay, I'm in this now for the rest of my life. And it's come up only once since a little bit, which was around the time that we purchased our home and land, which is 92 acres and two houses. So it's like this huge amount of stability. And at that point, I had a little bit more of that. It was different. It was like a different flavor. It really felt like that one layer of the onion of just like discomfort with stability had totally gone away. But there was some other little piece of like where I was questioning, like, do I want to be this grounded? And again, similar situation, things got a little chaotic and rocky for a while. And then somehow everything just shifted. And I do feel like, John's teachings, they apply to life and not just myofascial release. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I'm happy to speak about it more. I don't know how to. It's tricky. And it was also so long ago now at this point that it's crazy to think about. But like, I really do feel like I was meant to find myofascial release for that reason. I was just thinking about it the other day. Like, if I hadn't, I really don't know what situation I'd be in. I don't think I would be in a stable marriage. Like, absolutely not. I don't see how I could have with kind of the way my childhood was. I didn't have any really good examples of that in my life. And so now to have kind of overcome that, it definitely feels like I eased myself of emotional pain that was not necessarily going to happen, but most likely, I think.
I love that. And just curious, because in relationship or in marriage, it's a partnership between two people. So it sounds like you found myofascial release, started doing your inner journey and inner healing. Did your husband have to pursue
Mm-hmm.
avenues on his own, or was he just this grounded, centered person that just allowed it and was
Yeah, I mean, he is somehow incredibly grounded. So there is that for him. It's just kind of who he is. I personally think a lot of that comes from the fact that where we live, he goes back like 7 generations. So he's actually rooted in this place. Whereas I don't have any place that I could go to have that experience. Like my family's moved all around. And I do think there's something about that actually being rooted in the land that your ancestors are from for generation and generation and generation that somehow affects him that way. But I did take him to the healing seminar. When I did my first SES at Malvern, the healing seminar was happening and John invited us to go, and my husband went and got to meet John, and so I think at first he wasn't so sure what to think about myofascial release, but he actually really loved that experience. And he's also very intuitive. He's not a healer, but he is really good at using his hands for myofascial release. And so that was kind of special. And yeah, otherwise, I'm not sure. He is just very grounded and he's doing his own inner work all the time. It's just very inner for him. And for me, it's like I have a lot of external processing, I think, that needed to happen.
sure. And the reason I ask that is sometimes, especially as therapists, when we do this inner healing, or anyone, that you change as a person. And
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe that if you aren't growing together with your partner, you're going to grow apart. And
Yeah.
so inviting your partner along in this journey, I think, is necessary, but it only takes one of y'all to start that. And I can resonate with so much of your story. Something that I had read was a book called Attached, and it goes over different attachment styles. And the situation that typically arises, or very commonly arises, is an avoidant attachment person will get together with an anxious attachment person. And in a nutshell, like avoidance is something where, just like you described, like things are seemingly stable. This is the life that you want, but there's this inner pull of like, this isn't safe because of my upbringing. And I have a similar experience with that where, I didn't have this safety to express my emotions or even unpack them. And so I had to just recluse and process my emotions by myself. And whereas my wife, Yvette, she has somewhat of an anxious attachment. So when she feels like I'm pulling away, the world is kind of crashing down on her. And
Mm.
so it's this dance that we're still learning. We just got married maybe 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And I hear that the first year of marriage can be challenging. And I think it's because, hey, you are engaging in all these things. And I'll just say, hearing your story gives me the hope and kind of the stability that I can feel deeper within, because I know that in the moment when conflicts arise and it's super chaotic, it feels very intense and it feels like, hey, this isn't gonna stop, so I might as well get off this ride.
Mhm.
Whereas for me, I've had to dig a little deeper. And for me, I lean on my faith. I am a Christian. I am developing my own walk with God. And something that he says in the book of Proverbs is don't rely on your own understanding. And so it's hard to do that though, because everything that you've lived through, your experiences, what you learn, everything you go through shapes the way you view the world. And to let that go and say, hey, this is not what is the best for me takes a lot to do. And so If anyone's going through that journey, just know, like Lindsay said, there is light at the end of that tunnel, but it does take work and it's not gonna be smooth sailing all the time.
No, absolutely not. And also, well, I just want to say congratulations to you for your marriage. And yeah, like I said, my husband and I have been together, I think this year's 19 years and 12 married, and just learning how to listen to each other. And I think like what you described with the anxious attachment too, I can see a little bit of that with my husband. Like some of his wounding is maybe more around being abandoned. And so there is some of that fear that comes up in him if I'm pulling away too much. Like I said, if the balloon's like going up a little too high, but we're just at a point now that he knows he can trust that I will always be here and always come back to him, you know? And I do think that you and your wife will continue to learn over time as my husband and I are, because it's not like we have it all figured out. It's like we're learning all the time. But yeah, marriage is so great. It's so special. I wish it for everyone because I just can't really get behind the kind of new agey, like multiple partner, no commitment lifestyle. Like I just don't think that's where it's at for a lot of reasons, but it's pretty great to be married and happy.
I will agree with your sentiment. Obviously, no judgment for those who are in those
Yeah.
spaces and do those things, but there is something about, hey, I'm going to be married to this person and we're going to figure out this life together.
Yeah.
And that means doing all of the internal work, doing the external work, and finding that person who's like by your side. And
Yeah.
Yvette, for me, my wife, is that person, even though in conflict, sometimes it's hard for me to really feel that. And then something that John has mentioned in seminars is when you're in a relationship, it's not just the two of you. It's
Mm,
you two in the present moment, and then the both of y'all in your childhood. And so that is part of the work that it sounds like myofascial release has helped you overcome. And it definitely helps me. I think one of the biggest lessons that I have learned in myofascial release is the feeling of being centered and grounded. And so when we're in conflict, when I'm in conflict and I feel my emotions rising, and I feel this impulsivity and my voice kind of raising in volume, I'm not perfect at this. I'm not perfect at this, but when I catch myself, I will just get that feeling of being centered and just listen. I think in a few different seminars, but definitely in healing seminar, they will teach something called mind games. And that's where I think it's such a powerful exercise, but all you're doing is you're sitting across somebody. And for me, I did this with my now wife, but it can be with strangers and be equally as powerful. And you're just listening. So someone will just say what's bothering them, and they have 4 minutes, and the other person is just listening. They're not interrupting, they're not sharing anything, just listening. And then after 4 minutes, you switch turns, and then the same thing happens. And something about saying, hey, you're going to find the solution that you're looking for in this span of 4 to 5 minutes gets you to somehow find that within yourself because you're not being interrupted and you're not being
yeah.
triggered and all these things. And then you are actually able to be vulnerable. And that does take a sense of trust. But I think that's something that I have definitely learned from myofascial release because John does hold this container. All of the instructors hold this container for people to really be vulnerable and let go and get to these deeper levels that wouldn't have otherwise been scratched. So I love that. And it sounds like your husband had a good experience. Yvette, she had an interesting experience. It's cool because we've taken this seminar twice. And
Mm.
her first time, she was definitely triggered. I remember John did a demonstration, and her first words were, "Give me the keys, I'm out of here."
Oh my gosh.
And for me, I remember feeling kind of hurt because I was like, "Yo, this is my thing. I get to share it with you, and you're telling me to leave and all this stuff." But I had to center myself. I could tell that was my Channel 5 chatter, and I was like, "Okay, don't force her lead." and I gave her the keys, and she actually on her own stayed throughout the whole thing. And then without me asking, said, "Hey, if you want to take women's health," which is something I was wanting to take her to, then we could do that. And then, but by comparison, we repeated it. And her her response to it, because she had gotten more into it, she maybe released some layers, she was very receptive. And there was one part where we traded partners, and the partner that she worked with said, "Hey, are you a therapist? Because you have
Oh,
a great
wow.
touch." And I was like, "Dude, that's awesome." And kudos to her. I think she's very receptive to feedback, and she's always trying to be helpful, and she just knocked it out of the park. So it's cool to hear that your husband and you shared that experience. And for anybody who's in myofascial release, if you do get to share the seminars or just myofascial release with your partner, I think that one, it helps you grow closer, but two, it's cool to share this part of your life with somebody else.
Yeah, and it's also really nice to have my husband now be able to do a couple techniques if I need him to. So, yeah, it was really fun to have him there. And I'd like to do that again sometime.
I love that. Now, let's talk about your myofascial release practice. It sounds like, at least for what you shared with me, you found myofascial release towards the end of massage therapy school. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was sometime while I was still officially in massage school. Yeah.
And then you kind of took off with it. You had this experience where you're like, yo, I don't feel this internal pull to flee. This is where I am supposed to be. And then what got you to start your own practice?
Yeah, well, so those first couple years, I took a lot of seminars. And at that point, I was practicing massage out of a room in my house, and it was like a part-time job for me. And so over those couple years when I took Mo because it was in Vermont, and then I went to New York City for MFR1. And then after that, it was just like I took as many classes as I could. And I guess now that I'm thinking back on it, what happened was I got pregnant with my daughter, and I'd taken a bunch of seminars, and I was like, okay, I'm officially going to start my practice as an MFR therapist. So I was already, from the time I took my first seminar, I just basically started incorporating MFR into all my massages. And then by the time I took MFR1, which was just a few months after that, I just went like full MFR. I maybe gave a handful of massages here and there, but it was like I basically just was trying to do MFR, which now looking back on, I was to think of, like what my techniques were like then, what my skills were like. I definitely have grown a lot, and I think gotten a lot better over all these years. But I think I was still providing a lot of, it's like John talks about, like even after your first seminar, you have these certain skills that a massage is not going to do the same thing to someone. And so then in the beginning of 2015, I started my practice, Alchemy Myofascial Release. And I was pregnant with my daughter. She came in October that year. And so I'm really glad that I took as many seminars as I did close together, because I haven't been able to take nearly as many since starting to have kids. I now have 3 kids. I have a 9-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And so I've taken some seminars in between my kids, but between like at least a couple of years of breastfeeding and then being pregnant again, I just haven't traveled as far to go to seminars. But the last thing I did was another SES with John in Sedona. And it was just so nice to work with him in clinic. And I was there with just one other therapist who was a man. And so I got to be solo with John for a lot of the internal pelvic work he was doing with women, which felt really special to just kind of, just glean all of the knowledge I could from him and just be around his essence and his energy. So, yeah. And then my practice, I've built it up over time. I've rented different office spaces, but right around the time I went to Sedona for that last time, which was in the spring of 2022, so it's been a few years, I got my own office space that's a really beautiful, 2 huge rooms, wood floors, and marble fireplace. It's a big old historic building in Vermont here, and have just really been successful the last few years and finally got my practice as full as I would want it. Now I'm kind of rebuilding again because I had this other baby and I want a slimmer schedule, but it's been really good for me in a lot of ways. And nice to be able to have my own practice and kind of have that be flexible around having my kids too.
I love that. Now, let's unpack some of those things because you kind of gleaned over some, I think, very challenging moments. And I would imagine you have wisdom from that. So, you were pregnant and decided to start your own practice. Did,
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
well, yeah, I mean, I guess that sounds nerve-wracking. I will say my husband and I had started a vegetable farm, which was always a funny joke that John had with my husband once they met at the healing seminar because John hates vegetables. But we were not making very much money, I mean, just in general, a small scale organic farm, at least around here, it's not a big income generating operation. And so I didn't feel like it was that risky to just start my own practice.
Oh, wow. And then did you have any fears or you're just like, hey, this is kind of what I'm feeling called to do, and there's nothing to look back on?
Well, what I felt was that it didn't make sense to go and work for someone else that was going to take like 40 to 60% of each session, like that to me, even though it might have been more stable, that just did not make sense in my brain ever. It was painful to think of giving that much money to someone else. So even when I first started renting a space, I was renting a room it was like $10 an hour as I needed it. And it was a shared schedule. So it was kind of like whoever signed up first. And so that was really low risk. And then from there, I moved to an integrative practice where I rented a room, and that was with a couple acupuncturists and a naturopath. And so I rented the room there. And then after that, I just rented my own office space. And I don't know, I remember those moments early on where I was like, I remember saying to my husband, like, someday I know I'm going to make enough money for us, like someday I know I'm going to have this many clients. And I don't even know what that amount was at the time, but yeah, it took a while, but it definitely happened. And I think that's maybe my style in life, is like I didn't have that many fears around it. I just kind of knew that I would make it work, and it might be slow, but that eventually it would pay off.
I love that mindset because I think people get paralyzed because of their fears and they don't take that step. But what you did is you just made it very simple. You said, hey, I just don't think paying somebody else 40 to 60% of the session makes sense to me. And I'm going to do something else. And you didn't have to do everything all at once. I think sometimes when we see John's practices like Therapy on the Rocks or his
Yeah.
clinic in Malvern, you're like, wow, these are huge facilities. And it's like, he didn't start there. He built up to
Yeah.
that. Before Malvern, it was Paoli, and that I'm not really aware of. But everyone has their version of that. So I think I remember you saying, oh, I started with an empty room in my house, and then it
Yeah.
slowly built into something else. And I think sometimes that's forgotten or it's kind of gleaned over because you just see the end result and you're like, dang, Lindsay's over here and she's doing this. Whereas sometimes these conversations need to be had so that people know, like, you don't have to just do a cannonball and go all in and like put yourself in debt. It could just be something that you build over time very slowly. And then I love that you had this idea or this feeling of like, there's going to be a day that I make it.
Yeah.
Now that you've gotten to this point where you've quote unquote made it, what would you tell your younger self?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's actually really funny. I sometimes have dreams that I'm back in college or around that age, and I have these stress dreams of like, oh, what career am I going to have? Am I ever going to figure out what to do with my life? And then I wake up and I'm like, oh, thank God I found, you know? So I guess I would just, in terms of like my younger self, I would just the advice would be like, again, like, don't stress. It's all going to work out. And for beginning MFR therapists, I would just advise them to really just try to trust the process, let go of the outcome, the things John says, find the barrier and just wait there. It's like, how can you put as much of yourself into your business as possible without having, a huge amount of debt or something like that? Like, not forcing anything, but just really kind of like feeling into where that barrier is that feels comfortable, and then just seeing what happens, because it's been really beautiful for me. And there's not a ton of overhead getting started if you do it a certain way. Certainly if you like buy an office building and have a receptionist, and there's lots of ways that you can have a lot of overhead, but the way I did it, I didn't have much, and that really benefited me over the years.
Yes, and I would say that that is sage advice. You don't ever want to force something so that you are in over your head by having a high overhead.
Yeah.
And then the decisions you're making are not going to be based in channel three or this calmness, this stability, this groundedness and centeredness. It's going to be made off of scarcity because you're like, I have to make this money, you know?
Yeah.
And that energy that you put out does not get received well. And
No.
so make sure that one, you don't compare yourself. Comparison is a thief of joy. But just be where you're at in your present moment. And you only have to worry about the next step that you take, not anything else. And before long, if you just worry on one step at a time, you'll look back and you'll say, oh man, I've actually walked a long ways in this journey.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say too is, for anyone that wants, if a young therapist say that wants to have kids or something like that, I think that's the other thing I would advise, is to really form your practice so that it works for your whole life, not just your business. Like, it wouldn't work for me if I was making more money but never saw my kids. That's not ideal. The way my practice was, like, for example, with my last baby, I was able to just take at least a few months off from my in-person practice and then go back really, really slowly, so that I'm not even hardly having to pump. Like, I'm able to breastfeed my baby, be with her all as much as I want. And it's just so important that, I think once, now that I do have kids, and especially now that I have a 9-year old and a 9-month old, I know how quickly that time goes with children. And I'm so glad that I've built my business to be flexible around my kids so that I can have time with them, because I feel like John says something like, the purpose of life is to love your life or enjoy life or something like that. And I just think that that's so true. And my work really nourishes me. I love my work so much. I'd never be content to be a fully, like, stay at home mom all the time sort of person, but being able to be flexible and build your life so that it allows you for time to, and whether that's kids or not, that could be like just some activity that you like to do, or travel, or just building your practice so that it fits with your life holistically, I think is important too.
I love that. It reminds me of the podcast episode I did with Mike Gable. And he had started his own myofascial release practice, and he consciously chose how he wanted to have a relationship with his kids. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, where if you build your own business and your own practice, you actually get to decide how that serves you. I think so many people have it opposite. They think, hey, you have to get this job that kind of eats away at your soul to
Yeah.
pay the bills and do these things. Whereas a lot of myofascial release therapists will create their own businesses and practices to have a life worth living, in a sense,
Yes,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
And, I think that that is said so easily now that you quote unquote made it. But I think you can talk to your younger self and you're like, man, there's just all this extra stress that lives in your head. I think stress, anxiety, and fear all live in your head. But when you're able to drop from channel five in your head to channel three, you realize these opportunities are all around you. You just have to be patient and trust the process, and it will get there. Just don't ever give up.
Yep.
Now, something that you touched on was your T for T. And there was once a time where you could do this with John, and glean from his essence and learn from him, see how he interacts. Can you share your experience about your T for T?
Oh, well, so do you mean my SES or my T for T? Because I did both, but the skill enhancement seminar
Yeah,
or
sorry,
like
the
the,
SES.
okay. Yeah. So can you not do that with him anymore? Is he
I
not?
don't think he treats anymore.
Okay. Yeah, that probably has changed in the last couple of years, I guess. Yeah, so I did my first SES in that first year of learning, and then I did another one in 2022, I think. And that was, I think, not that many months before John's injury. And the first time there were four of us, and that was in Malvern. And I remember one of the things I really love remembering about that SES was you always write out your goals. I think you do that at both locations. I'm trying to remember, but at Malvern, at least, you write out your goals for the week. And one of mine was to learn more anatomy. And John was like, nope, you don't need to learn more anatomy. And I was kind of like, okay, well, that's easy for you to say as a physical therapist who knows all the anatomy, you know, but it really was so powerful for me. And I've thought of that a lot because of course I have learned more anatomy over the years, but his point was just, you know, be present with the person in front of you and everything is connected and you don't need to know this muscle from this muscle. And it was just wonderful to be with him treating. It was interesting to me that sometimes he wouldn't hold the techniques quite as long and he could just feel that things had released. And now as a more advanced therapist, I can feel how sometimes that happens. You know, the shifts happen more quickly than other times. Sometimes or sometimes you move on because it's like nothing is happening wherever you are. And the second time that I got to be with him in Sedona, yeah, it was really special. I just really love everything about John. I love his sense of humor and I love the way he's kind of no nonsense in a way with the clients and just kind of like, you know, like he's not gonna I want to say like he's not gonna baby them in the way that some I think some patients do need a little bit of coddling and they need to be like nurtured. And he's just kind of like, no nonsense, like, let's do the work. And that's where he knows the magic is like when he has his hands on someone, not in like hearing them talk about their ailments over and over again, which, you know, sometimes we can have those stories that they don't really serve us after a while once we tell the same injury story over and over and over again. And so, yeah, I got to see him working with clients or with his patients there. And I really treasured the time that I spent working with him directly. And at that point, you know, I've only maybe been to three seminars since my daughter was born, something like that. Like I've repeated a little bit, but it like I said, it's been challenging for me between breastfeeding and pregnancy and having kids. And then with that last one, I was like, I really just want to spend time with John as much as possible. And that's why I chose to do the SES again. And I really am glad that I did. It was really powerful for me and the other therapists in Sedona as well. Just being around all of them and being in that clinic is so great. And I'd gone there for my T for T, the therapy for the therapist, like a 1 week intensive right when I got started with MFR. And that was, you know, a big investment and was also so informative for me. I learned so much through receiving a lot of work. So I would highly recommend either one of those for people that are just getting started. I know it can feel like a big investment versus taking a seminar, but I just feel like it really kind of quantum leaped my own abilities and my own healing too.
Yes, absolutely. If you have the opportunity to take one or the other or both, it will serve you well, especially if you're a myofascial release therapist. But obviously, everyone goes at their own pace.
Yeah.
And I will just say that, yes, there's something about John's energy or how he carries himself that allows for this authentic healing to take place. And I remember I took my SES in Malvern. And it was a great experience. One, because I had never been there, but when you get to learn from John, and I think you got even a couple of sessions with him, that was totally worth it. That was totally
Yeah.
worth it. And what sold me on MFR was I have learned from different, I'll say, elders where they treat different patients and I get to see that. But when I got to do my SES and I saw the type of patient that came through, I was like, how would I go about doing this? And it would never be as impactful as someone who is just present and centered and having their hands on them and just facilitating that healing process. But after my SES, I was like, this is my tea, like
Yeah.
he treats some of the most complicated cases, and because of myofascial release, these quote unquote complicated cases are easy to treat because you just follow your intuition, see what you're guided towards, and just hold the barrier. And yes, you can feel things, and it's up to the therapist to make that distinction of, hey, when is the release there? How long do you have to hold it? Maybe nothing's going on. Maybe you move to a different spot. But if you are brand new, I would highly recommend just getting into the habit of holding these releases
Yes.
for at least 5 minutes. Because I know in the beginning that can feel like an eternity. And especially if you're used to massage or you're doing, just petrissage and effleurage and you're just rubbing the tissues, holding one spot can feel like it's a long time. But the longer you do it, you realize, hey, all you're doing is feeling that barrier and seeing where it moves. And that can take
Totally.
some time.
I love now. I was just thinking about this the other day when I was treating because I had a new patient or client, I would say, and I realized that I had absolutely no, performance anxiety or worry about like if they think that what I'm doing is weird or whatever. And I was just able to sink in to this release and then to notice when I felt that resonance between my hands and that was the time to move on. And I was kind of like, I guess I was just thinking a lot about how much I've grown as a therapist and how much more I can feel now than when I was first starting out, just how much more sensation I feel under my hands. And that only happens when you're still and hold for a long time. So yeah, I totally agree. And more often for me, I would say that, yeah, it's more like 10 minutes or at least 5 minutes. And time just kind of goes by now when I'm doing that. It doesn't feel so long anymore.
You got it. And it's just learning this artistry. I think everyone in the beginning, so there's no worries if you feel like, oh man, am I doing it right? Or you have this
Yeah,
performance anxiety, or you're in your own head about what you think the other person is thinking about you. Like, those are all normal things that people will go through. And just know that, hey, with practice, just like anything else, you'll get better over time and you'll grow as a practitioner, and ultimately you'll help your patient or client. That's the most important thing. And on the point of helping your patients and clients, I think you had mentioned that you've done some online courses to help serve your audience and your clients. Can you speak on that a little bit?
yeah, I would love to. So I basically, what happened is I got invited to be on this podcast called Medicine Stories. It's not at all related to myofascial release, but it's kind of holistic health. And it has a pretty big following. And so I knew I was going to be on this podcast. And I just thought, like, I should create some sort of offering because a lot of times when people do go on a podcast, they say, like, here's your coupon code, and you can now go and get this course for a discount or whatever. And so I decided to do a myofascial breast care course. And it was really successful. I think I had over 400 women sign up for that first class. I sold it at $33. So I made it really accessible. But I also had like what they call a bump order, where when you check out, there's another little box you can check. And that was for another little course. And there was a lot of demand. I think a lot of women don't know what they can do to care for their own breast tissue. And there's a lot of fear also around breast cancer. And I feel like this is a way to empower women to be active in their breast health as opposed to just like only touching their breasts when they're looking for a lump or something wrong. And so I did that class, and then I kind of just, it was successful enough that I felt like I should just keep going. So I did an internal pelvic class teaching women how to do, their own internal pelvic self-care. And then I made one that was for men and women, for a head, neck, and jaw class with, cranial and cervical techniques. And then I did a myofascial self-care for pregnancy class. And so with all of them, there's been quite a bit of demand. I started marketing myself on Instagram, which, not everyone wants to do that. But for me, it's been really helpful, especially as I've, for example, like had this last baby. It just gave me this little boost in my business income so that I could take more time off and not feel any pressure to get back to work. And I do think it's really important for myofascial therapists, if they have any interest in going this route. I think there's so much demand there. And fascia is finally, I think, becoming more well known in mainstream sort of dialogue conversations and podcasts and news stories. And so I think people are looking for this kind of course, or some sort of way that they can access it. Not everyone lives in a place where they can easily get to a myofascial release therapist, so this is a way that they can do this from home. And I set it up as these 2-hour classes because as a mom, I just feel really quite busy, and a 2-hour chunk of time is a much easier amount of time than like a longer sort of course. And so I just would encourage anyone that has any interest in teaching online to explore that, because at first I thought it was not possible. And now, just from the testimonials I've received from people, I know that people are having a huge amount of healing by touching their own bodies. And it's, through me sharing what I've learned from John and myofascial sort of principles. And so I would love to, as I mentioned to you, I would love to grow that pie. I'm not worried about other therapists taking a piece of the pie. I think we all need to just spread myofascial release as far and wide as we can. And some of that is going to be through these online classes.
I love that. Now, I just want to make sure that my audience and people know is you definitely want to follow the right order. And so, but what I mean by that is go to the seminar so you can learn what it feels like to be in this space where, hey, do you know what it feels like to be centered? Do you know what it feels like to have soft hands, like your hands are molding into clay? And can you get those results first so that you can know what the principles are really teaching you? But like you had mentioned before, the principles apply not just when you're in this myofascial release space, but it applies to your entire life. And so then you can start applying these lessons and seeing where that takes you. And you found a wonderful space in the online space. And I will just say, make sure that you're also ready for that, because it takes a totally different skill set to run an online course than it does to do an in-person myofascial release session. So if that's something that nudges you and you feel interested in, then yes, 100% explore that space. But I just want to make sure that people know that it's not just as easy as like, oh, I have an idea for a course, I'm going to do it, and then everyone's going to buy it. It takes some work, which I'm sure you can attest to.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does take work. I would also say, I think it's more than anything, I would say, like, listen to your intuition, because I've felt sort of intuitively drawn towards trying to spread myofascial release more widely. And this was a way that I could do it. And now, having had, thousands of people take these classes, it just makes me feel really good. And sometimes people message me and ask, like, where can I find a myofascial release therapist? And I'm either able to recommend someone I know or send them to the directory. And I love just helping people to feel empowered to do their own hands-on work with the myofascial principles, because that's the thing. It's like, even if you're receiving MFR from a therapist, the patients that get better and stay better are the ones who have a self-care practice. So I agree. It's not super simple. I didn't do it alone. I had the help of a friend who helped me, set up this like course portal and all the things. And none of that is really exactly my cup of tea, but I do feel called to teach and kind of spread I kind of want to call it the gospel of John Barnes. And obviously, there are so many amazing and much more advanced, much more experienced therapists than me within the John Barnes organization who assist at seminars and teach at seminars. And that's not the place that I can be as much as I'd like to. And so this is a way that I can kind of spread the word in a different sort of outlet. And I'm happy to be teaching in that way.
I love that. I think it just goes to show that if you quiet yourself and you be still, your intuition will speak to you if you let it. And that is
Yes.
totally channel 3. Now, before we get out of here, is there any last thing that you would like to share with my audience?
Yeah, I guess just not to give up, because I do think I think this work can be so fulfilling. Like I said, when I have those dreams where I'm worried that I'm not going to find my calling or something, and then I wake up, it's like with such relief that I have found the work that I am doing. I love myofascial release so much, and I have so much gratitude towards John for allowing me to learn with him and with the other teachers as well. So yeah, I think just not to give up and to continue to listen to your intuition and really take all of those principles we learn, like never to force and those sorts of things, and as much as possible, just apply it to your whole life, and you'll be happy for it.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And if someone wanted to work with you, how would they find you?
I have a website. It's actually, so it can either be alchemymfr.com or lindsaycourcelle.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Lindsay Courcelle. And those are the ways. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Lindsay, I just want to thank you for being open and honest with us. I got some huge insights, some deeper insights that I learned from you, and I'm sure the audience will as well. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.